When I first started posting my paintings on YouTube, they looked like this. Now in 2024, they look like this. Today, I want to walk you through the 4 specific steps that it required for me to actually achieve this transformation in my work so that you can do the same thing in your own oil painting practice. Now, for a little bit of context, when I began this journey or this transformation process that I'm going to be walking you through today, it's really important to note that I had been painting for quite some time beforehand. I was regularly practicing my drawing or doing things like digital painting. I had a few years of oil painting experience under my belt already. And so I'm not going to go over really basic things like getting to know your materials because, frankly, I already had all of those pieces in place beforehand. And I think you would be better served by really hammering out those essentials first before you dive into these steps. That being said, I really started taking oil painting seriously about a year before I started putting paintings on YouTube. So this process that you're going to see me walk through really does cover the bulk of the journey once I was essentially comfortable with oil painting in general. That's not to say that I was making great paintings yet, but it meant that I really was already familiar with the tools and things like fat over lean. Essentially, I could really confidently put out paints, grab a canvas, and start painting. And I think that checking that box off is probably an important first step for anyone following this advice. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and talk through the very first step in unlocking this kind of transformation for myself. And that is, I was clear on my taste and where exactly I wanted to go. When I got serious about really getting better as an artist, I might not have been clear on the exact path that I would need to take in order to get there, but I was really clear on the exact direction that I wanted to head. It wasn't enough for me to simply say, I want to be better, or I want to be able to paint looser. That could take so many forms. Am I talking John Singer Sargent loose? Or Carolyn Anderson loose? Or David Schiavino loose? What about Scott Burdick loose? Or Richard Schmid loose? Ultimately, deciding what direction really spoke most to me was an essential part of this process. Because when I had a concrete example of the kind of work that I wanted to push my painting toward, I could compare what I was making one-to-one with paintings that I aspired toward. It's not to say that I wanted to copy these paintings, but rather I acknowledged that they used techniques and color and brushwork that I wanted to be able to put into my paintings in some way. To actually get clear on this, I started what has become an ongoing practice for me of creating and maintaining a vision board or an inspiration board of the kind of art that I respond to. So I have a big inspiration board with everything under the sun that I like, and then I also did the work to whittle down this collection to the handful of paintings that embody exactly what I would love to create myself. For help doing this on your own, I've made a start-to-finish, step-by-step walkthrough of exactly how I do this today. I'm going to link that above so that you can check it out and you can actually check off this essential step on your own right now. Seriously, I would do this before anything else. You may think you have a clear idea of where you're headed, but I can't tell you just how many painters come to me absolutely blown away by the surprises they uncover when they go through this exercise. But once I knew what those techniques and color palettes and brushwork looked like exactly that I was aspiring to based on the paintings on my inspiration board, then it was time to start training. So the second key thing that I did was to identify what exercises would work best for me to actually develop the skills necessary to paint the way I wanted to paint. I don't just intuitively create paintings like the one you're seeing me make here. Well, it may come naturally now, but being able to create these paintings took training and practice. And furthermore, that practice was really intentional. And that is what this step is all about. So I talked to artists who were on my inspiration board. They then recommended exercises, or they actually showed me through things like workshops how to practice painting this way. And I spent a lot of time researching and using trial and error until I pinpointed the exact exercises at the easel that worked best for me and best for my goal to make sure that I would actually get there. Here are the top exercises that I took away. First and foremost, don't underestimate the power of copying. The best artists today have spent a ton of time on copies, whether it was through things like bark drawings, copying masters like Sargent, or even doing copies from their friends' and peers' best paintings that they really admire. I can't tell you how many artists I know have houses or studios full of copies and color studies from contemporary artists that really helped them to get their skills to where they are today, or keep them sharp once they really got the skills in place. When you get really good at copying, the next challenge is to understand how to get the sort of reference that you need to paint from in order to paint the way you want to paint. I labored under the delusion that great painters didn't need great reference, but that they could just sort of paint out of their head. And in some industries, that is normal. But when we're talking about fine art and oil paintings, and especially when we're talking about realism, well, the kinds of painters that I look up to invested a ton of time to set up precisely the kind of image that they wanted to create. This meant having the right model in the right setting with the correct lighting and thoughtfully chosen costuming and props. Not just taking a quick candid with your iPhone or searching Pinterest for a nice photo to work from. And then I needed to actually practice doing this for myself. So between these two exercises, I could actually go back and forth between my intentional study of master paintings and working on original setups that actually set me up for success to create those kinds of paintings. The closer my original compositions were to the copies that I could successfully make, the easier it was to see the translation into my own original paintings. Once I knew what to do, I had to find an objective way to measure my growth, though. And that's going to be really tricky because oil painting is by nature subjective and hard to quantify. Take, for example, something like basketball. If you take a shot, you know immediately whether you scored or not. If you're looking to track improvement practice after practice, you can take a look at your shooting percentage or total number of points scored. Or if a sports metaphor isn't your thing, imagine trying to learn a song on the piano. You know right away if you hit a wrong note. And in trying to get better, you can actually track your progress by the number of right versus wrong notes you hit. If you're starting to hit more and more correct notes and make fewer and fewer mistakes, you are that much closer to being able to perform this particular piece on piano. These examples are, of course, simplified down a bit, but I hope you understand how painting just isn't like these examples. We might know if we're happy with a painting, but it's really hard to know in the moment if we put down a brushstroke in exactly the right place or exactly the right color. We often have to wait for the context of the rest of the painting to appear in order to tell whether it's really working. And even then, it's really tough to measure that objectively. What's often easiest to judge instead is our progress based on whether or not we liked the end product. But that absolutely neglects the possibility that you have a painting where you make an absolute breakthrough in the beginning of your painting, but maybe difficulty mixing the right color meant that by the time the painting was done, it looked like a muddy, overworked mess. You might have seriously progressed in that example, but it can really be covered up, or that progress can go completely ignored if you're just judging your success based on the end product. And building on this is the fact that painting progress just isn't linear. If we're improving, every painting we make isn't just magically and mathematically better than the last one. We naturally go through rises and falls in our overall trajectory. I made some really strong paintings that I still love back when I first started this channel. And I make paintings today that totally fall flat. But overall, I can see the trend if I step back and get analytical about what I'm seeing. So at the end of the day, it's really tough to track our progress when it comes to painting. To combat this in my own journey, I would be really intentional with what I needed to learn, which really goes back to step one of knowing my goal, knowing what I wanted my paintings to really look like. If I could look at my favorite paintings and tell that the paint that painter used was wetter, or that the painting was executed with fewer, more accurately placed brushstrokes, or the colors were just more subdued than mine, I could set a goal, painting after painting, to pay attention to how I was working and whether I was getting more successful working wet into wet, putting down the right mark and leaving it, or mixing colors that were more nuanced and subtle. And if my painting looked like it could belong on my inspiration board, well, that's how I knew I was actually achieving my goal. But getting to that stage takes a lot of time. I started focusing on my channel consistently 4 years ago, and I'm still continuing to push toward my goal, which brings me to my fourth step. And that is that it has to be enjoyable so you stick to your plan in the long run. The truth is, getting really great at painting isn't the kind of thing you can just flip a switch on. It's going to take hundreds, if not thousands of hours at the easel to go from where you already are to really mastering your craft and loving the results that you have. And if it isn't fun, well, it doesn't matter how great your action plan is or how dialed in your exercises at the easel are, you just won't put in enough time to get the results. Instead, it was essential for me to figure out how to really want to show up in my studio painting after painting. Many of us start out painting after work as a way to unwind and really feel in touch with our creative spirits. And at that stage, it's almost always fun. But working to get better is, well, work. But if we can help it, we really don't want it to feel like work because that increases the likelihood that we're going to start to avoid it. After all, who wants to put in an 8-hour shift at a day job and then come home for 3 more hours of work? Most of us would much rather put in 3 hours of play after a long day, which is why thinking of your practice as being playful is just as important as it being intentional. And I'm going to be honest, this has been absolutely a work in progress for me. I have had periods of burnout or art block, and these periods have been the times that have really shown me why play is so important. So for me, what really made a difference was having mentorship and community. If I had a guide that I respected or friends that I could turn to early in my journey who really understood it as artists themselves, I probably would have gotten to where I am now much more quickly. But what matters is that I'm here. I have the community and artists that I respect and trust to help guide me now. And in turn, being able to hop on a phone call with these people and paint simultaneously from our respective studios halfway across the country, or being able to get together to have dinner and talk art, or even occasionally paint in the same place at the same time, this has become a core pillar of my creative practice. And the great thing about not being alone in the journey is that we foster that sense of play in one another. We point out the growth that we see in one another's paintings. We cheer one another on. We challenge one another to go after a truly ambitious idea, even if we fail this time. Maybe we challenge one another to paint entirely with our non-dominant hand. Or maybe we tell one of our friends to try limiting our palettes to some wacky combination of pigments we would never normally choose, just to see if we can pull it off and have the painting actually look kind of okay. We very happily talk through the aspects of a painting that are really kicking our butts. We're very quick to reassure one another that this is a process, and the act of trying and failing actually helps you to learn much more quickly than just being handed the right answer and never getting it wrong in the first place. In fact, just last week, I was talking with Livia Miller and Erica Arcudi from East Oaks, and Erica made an observation that I thought was just so well articulated that I've been thinking about it all week. We were talking about our shared goal of putting together really grand, exciting paintings that are of exactly the subjects and the kinds of compositions that most challenge us and are going to be really ambitious. This would mean doing things like hiring models and scouting locations, or figuring out how to regularly work with a model from life session after session, or researching costuming, or figuring out props, or playing around with lighting until we really got it perfect. And because the ideas that we were talking about are so complex and sophisticated, the fear that Erica articulated was, well, wouldn't it just be better if I waited 5 years and then tried to make this painting once I really had the skills? And I know exactly what she means. But then she remarked that she had this epiphany that the only way to get good enough to really nail that painting in 5 years is to go out and try and make that painting today. So maybe you think you have a really clear idea for the painting that you want to make, but there are some gaps in your plan. Well, you probably won't know, you probably can't know until you go out with the model and you start working with them. And you see what the composition's actually going to look like, rather than simply envisioning it theoretically in your mind's eye. Or maybe there's a flaw with that composition in the first place, and it's not going to become obvious until you actually have it down in paint. It's not enough to simply think about it and hope that that's going to give us enough skill to be ready. Part of getting better is trying and really embracing paintings that just do not succeed. Because those paintings that do not work are the ones that teach you what you really need to avoid or do differently. They are the ones that really prepare you for success, specifically the success you're going to have months or even years down the line. And so the best mentorship and community, in my mind, is the one that fosters not only the idea of deliberate, thoughtful practice that's targeted toward your unique goal, it's also the one that fosters a culture of playing, experimenting, trying, and often failing, because this is where the biggest breakthroughs come from. Yesterday, one of my students, Michael, shared a way that he cultivates both play and clear feedback in his own studio practice. Every time he's about to use something like Photoshop to see if his painting block-in was accurate, he'll stand back and give himself one chance to evaluate one more time how accurate his drawing is. He'll jot down notes for each area that he thinks needs fixing. And then, when he actually checks the drawing using an objective tool, he scores himself +1 for every mistake that he successfully caught, and -1 for everything he missed. As he explained to me and my student community, I always go negative, but I am slowly improving my score over time. And I could tell just how excited he was when he posted that to the group. What I love about this is that it combines both of these things that I'm really trying to talk about here. It allows Michael to turn his process into something that is really concrete and actionable. It's easy to see his progression, but he's also turned it into a game where the objective isn't to be perfect. The objective is to grow. One final note about intentional play is that in all of my experience in my own journey, as well as my teaching journey, is that it doesn't matter how well planned your painting journey is or how well designed your practice might be. If you are too burnt out, discouraged, frustrated, or just plain tired to paint, none of it makes a difference. So at the end of the day, it's essential that we foster that sense of enjoyment in play first and foremost. And within that, we can then really get intentional about how to really make the most of your practice and grow most efficiently. If you want this kind of support in your own painting journey, or you want to achieve a transformation that is like my own or my students', I would love to hear from you. This is what I truly love getting to do. So if you're interested in getting these kind of results, make sure to check out the link in the description box below to reach out and see if we would be a great fit to work together. I'd love to help you to reach your goals in a way that is personalized, strategic, and above all else enjoyable, so you actually can feel like the artist you want to be seen as. Until then, happy painting.